My name is Isabel Taylor, and I was 31 the morning I held a gold-plated pen over the most lucrative contract of my life. I had spent 4 years auditing corporate fraud for a logistics firm in Overland Park, Kansas. I worked long weeks. I skipped vacations. I tracked every missing cent in the company ledgers. This promotion to senior risk analyst was the finish line. The morning sun was cutting through the glass walls of the corner office. I could smell the fresh ink on the heavy paper. But before the nib of my pen could touch the signature line, my boss David pulled the folder out of my reach. He did not look me in the eye. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and let out a heavy breath. Then he slid a different sheet of paper across the polished mahogany desk. The top of the page was stamped with the seal of the Johnson County Police Department. The text stated that Isabel Taylor had been detained and booked the previous weekend on charges of grand larceny. My own family had sent my employer a forged police report to label me a felon. I looked at the paper and I felt the heat leave my hands. The edges of the text held the faint pixelated blur of a low-resolution scan. But here is what the people who forged that document forgot. I hunt liars for a living, and people who lie always leave a paper trail. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where we tell the stories of ordinary people who use quiet strategy to outsmart toxic families. If you enjoy watching a calculated trap snap shut, let me know your age in the comments and hit subscribe. David cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the quiet office. He told me Human Resources intercepted the facts 10 minutes ago. He said corporate policy required him to ask if I had an undisclosed legal situation. He watched my face, waiting for a reaction. Most people would panic. Most people would cry or scream or demand to know who was framing them. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a tear. Crying does not clear a false accusation. Data does. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. I navigated to the Kansas Public Records portal. I bypassed the basic search and logged into the secured background check clearinghouse our firm used for high-level vendor vetting. My fingers moved over the keys with practiced rhythm. I typed in my social security number and hit enter. The screen flashed green. 0 arrests, 0 warrants. A pristine record. David stared at the screen for a long time. He leaned back in his leather chair and rubbed his jaw. He said someone was going to great lengths to ruin my career. He asked if I had any idea who would target me with a forged legal document. I reached across the desk and picked up the fake police report. I did not waste time looking at the fake badge numbers or the blurry police seal. I looked at the very top margin of the page. There was a faint line of text printed by the transmitting fax machine. It read, Area code 316, Wichita. Next to the date and time was the sender identification, Taylor Insurance Group. That was my father's local insurance agency. The room felt suddenly cold. My lungs tightened. I had not spoken to Richard or Patricia Taylor in 5 years. I walked away from them the day I realized they viewed me not as a daughter, but as a funding source. For years, I had subsidized their lifestyle. I paid their late bills. I funded the endless failed boutique businesses of my older sister, Jessica. They demanded obedience and a share of my income. When I finally stopped writing the checks, they cut me off. They had not called me on a single birthday. They had not sent a single email. Instead, they waited 5 years and forged a legal document to destroy my livelihood. I set the paper down on the desk. I smoothed the edges with my thumb. I looked David in the eye and told him I knew exactly who sent the fax. I explained it was a targeted personal attack from estranged relatives. I told him my father owned the insurance agency listed in the header. David listened quietly. He nodded slowly. He said he believed me. He said my work history was flawless and the live background check proved the fax was a lie. He wanted to give me the promotion. I could see it in his posture. But then he crossed his arms, and the corporate director returned to his face. Corporate protocol is blind, he said. When a document claiming a felony crosses the Human Resources desk, They cannot just ignore it. They mandate a 48-hour administrative leave. They have to run the incident through the legal department. They have to verify the forgery with the county police to protect the firm from liability. He told me the promotion was paused indefinitely. He told me I had to hand over my corporate badge and leave the building immediately. I did not argue. Arguing with corporate policy is like arguing with a brick wall. It only bruises your own hands. I stood up and unclipped my lanyard. The plastic badge hit the mahogany desk with a dull click. I placed it right next to the forged police report. I gathered my coat and my laptop. David said he was sorry this was happening. I told him I would see him in 2 days. The walk from the corner office to the elevator felt like wading through deep water. My colleagues typed at their desks, unaware that I was being escorted out like a security risk. The descent to the lobby took 30 seconds. Every floor we passed felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I walked through the glass doors and out into the Kansas wind. The sky was bright blue, mocking the sudden collapse of my morning. I walked to my assigned parking spot and sat in my car. I did not turn the key. I just stared at the steering wheel. I was locked out of my own professional life. The promotion I had bled for was gone. My reputation at the firm was stained with a question mark. I gripped the leather of the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I took a deep breath and forced my mind to compartmentalize the betrayal. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I asked myself the only question that mattered. Why would my own parents risk federal wire fraud just to get me fired? What did they stand to gain from my ruin? They lived hours away. They had no part in my daily life. Destroying my job would not bring them money. It would only bring me pain. Unless they needed me vulnerable. Unless they needed me to lose my independence, so I would be forced to return to Wichita. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I was not going to wait for human resources to save me. I was not going to wait out the 48 hours in silence. My family had treated my life like a game they could manipulate from afar. They thought they could break me with a single piece of paper. They forgot that I spend every single day dismantling complex frauds. I started the engine. I was going to audit my own family, and I was going to find out exactly what they were hiding. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan and let the quiet of the enclosed cabin wash over me. The engine remained off. The Overland Park Corporate Center loomed through my windshield, reflecting the morning sun. I took my phone out of my coat pocket and opened the photo gallery. Before I surrendered my corporate badge to David, I had discreetly snapped a picture of the forged document resting on his desk. My thumb dragged across the glass screen to zoom in on the text. I ignored the fake police seal. I ignored the invented badge numbers. I focused entirely on the narrative paragraph detailing my supposed crime. My eyes scanned the black letters the way a jeweler examines a stone for fractures. Then I saw it. The charge was listed as grand larceny, but the word was spelled wrong. The author had added an extra letter, L-A-R-C-E-N-C-Y, larcency. I stared at that misspelled word, and a cold, bitter recognition settled in the back of my throat. That specific typo was a ghost from my childhood. My mother, Patricia, had struggled with that exact word since I was in grade school. I remembered her writing angry letters to the local homeowner association about neighborhood theft. I remembered her leaving notes on the kitchen counter complaining about being shortchanged at the grocery store. She always added that extra letter C. She spelled it larcency every single time. That one letter was a fingerprint. It removed any lingering doubt. My father might have used his insurance agency fax machine to send the document, but my mother had typed the narrative. I locked my phone and rested my forehead against the leather of the steering wheel. The history between my family and me was not a story of gentle drifting apart. It was an amputation. 5 years ago, I packed my bags and walked away from a financial black hole. From the moment I earned my first paycheck, they treated my bank account like a community ledger. I was expected to cover my parents' late utility bills. I was guilted into paying the rent for my older sister, Jessica. Jessica is 34 years old and has never held a job for more than 6 months. She is the golden child, the fragile creative soul who needed constant bailouts for her endless string of failed boutique businesses. When I finally drew a boundary and stopped writing the checks, the retaliation was swift. They did not ask how I was doing. They did not apologize. They called me selfish and cut all communication. They expected the silence to break me. They expected me to come crawling back with my wallet open. When I built a successful life, instead they realized their silent treatment had failed. Now they were shifting to active destruction. A security guard in a yellow vest began walking through the parking lot checking vehicle tags. I turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life. I shifted into drive and pulled out of the corporate complex. I needed to clear my head. I needed distance from the building where my career was currently hanging by a thread. 10 minutes down the highway, the low fuel indicator illuminated on my dashboard. I pulled into a corner gas station and parked beside the furthest pump. The wind whipped across the concrete island as I stepped out of the car. I grabbed the fuel nozzle with one hand and retrieved my debit card with the other. I slid the plastic stripe through the payment terminal. The machine processed for 3 seconds. Then a sharp, discordant beep pierced the air. The digital screen flashed red text. "Transaction declined. Please see cashier." I frowned. My checking balance was more than healthy. I pulled the card out, wiped the magnetic stripe on my coat sleeve, and inserted the chip reader. The terminal beeped again. "Transaction declined." A heavy knot formed in my stomach. I returned the fuel nozzle to its cradle and stepped back into the shelter of my car. I pulled up my secure banking application on my phone. The login screen accepted my face scan, but the main dashboard was blocked by a stark crimson banner. "Account restricted. Fraud prevention lock initiated." They were not just trying to get me fired. They were cutting off my oxygen. I closed my eyes and mapped the architecture of the attack. How did Patricia lock my independent finances? Then I remembered a mistake I made a decade ago. When I was 18 years old, heading off to college, my mother co-signed a basic student checking account so she could transfer textbook money. I emptied that specific ledger 5 years ago when I cut ties, but I never formally closed the routing number. The account sat dormant in the bank's legacy system. Patricia still had her name on that ghost account. She had weaponized the banking system against her own daughter. She used my Social Security number and her status as a legacy joint account holder to trigger a catastrophic fraud freeze. She wanted me unemployed and penniless. She wanted me starving. A normal person would dial their mother right then. A normal person would scream into the receiver and demand the hold be lifted. But I know how fraud departments operate. Screaming implies instability. Screaming plays right into the narrative that I am a criminal having a breakdown. I dialed the customer service number on the back of my debit card. I navigated the automated menus with cold precision. When a representative named Marcus answered the line, I kept my voice flat and professional. "Good morning, Marcus," I said. "My name is Isabel Taylor. My primary accounts have been restricted, and I need to initiate a security bypass to restore access." Marcus asked for my Social Security number and my current address. I provided both. He paused, typing rapidly on his keyboard. "Miss Taylor, I see a red flag here. A joint account holder reported your card stolen an hour ago. The notes indicate you were recently incarcerated and your financial identity was compromised." The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Patricia had called the bank spinning a tragic tale about her criminal daughter to lock my funds. "That report is entirely fraudulent, Marcus," I replied. "I am sitting in my car, not a jail cell. I am the primary account holder. I want to verify my identity using the secondary security pins established on the main ledger." Patricia did not know my secondary pins. She only knew the legacy college account numbers. I recited my verbal password. I provided the specific answers to my internal security questions. Marcus verified the data. The typing stopped. "Thank you, Miss Taylor," he said, his tone shifting to a more respectful cadence. "The security answers match perfectly. I am lifting the restriction on your primary funds right now. I will also permanently sever the legacy joint account from your profile to prevent further unauthorized access." I thanked him, but I did not hang up. I needed to turn their weapon into evidence. Marcus, I need you to do one more thing for me, I said. As the primary account holder who was just subjected to malicious financial interference, I am requesting the compliance data from the fraudulent phone call. I need the exact timestamp, and I want to officially request the voice recording of the person who initiated the freeze for my legal records. There was a brief silence on the line. I knew the bank recorded all fraud prevention calls for quality and liability assurance. Marcus confirmed the policy. He told me he could not email the audio file directly, but he could flag the recording in the compliance archive and provide me with the specific tracking number. Any lawyer or police officer could subpoena the audio file instantly using that number. I wrote the tracking number down on a notepad in my center console. Patricia thought she was locking me out of my money. Instead, she had just handed me a recorded confession of federal identity theft. I ended the call. The red banner disappeared from my banking application. My funds were secure. I took a deep breath, letting the cold armor of strategy lock firmly into place. I had lost my promotion this morning, but I was no longer the victim. I was the auditor, and my family was the target. Before I could put my phone away, the screen lit up with a new text message. The sender name was Jessica. I stared at the incoming bubble. I had not spoken to my sister in half a decade. I tapped the screen and read the message. Heard things are bad at work. Need help packing. The air in the cabin grew thin. My pulse finally skipped a beat. The fake police report had been faxed to my boss only an hour ago. Human Resources had placed me on administrative leave less than 40 minutes ago. The event was entirely internal. Corporate protocol dictated absolute silence on personnel matters. So how did my chronically unemployed sister, sitting in a house 3 hours away, know I was suddenly out of a job? I stared at Jessica's text message. The glowing words on the screen were a blatant confirmation of the conspiracy. Heard things are bad at work. Need help packing. My sister did not possess the intelligence to gather internal corporate gossip. She was acting as the gloating mouthpiece for my parents. They assumed their plan had executed flawlessly. They believed I was currently sitting in my car weeping over the destruction of my career. I did not reply to the text. Silence is a weapon people like Jessica do not know how to defend against. When you refuse to give them the reaction they crave, they become desperate. And desperate people make technical mistakes. I threw the car into gear and pulled out of the gas station. I drove straight back to my apartment complex in Overland Park, taking the back roads to avoid traffic. I needed access to my hardware. The corporate laptop had been confiscated by Human Resources, but my personal server array at home was heavily fortified. I walked into my apartment, locked the deadbolt, and threw my coat onto the sofa. I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to my home office. I booted up my custom-built desktop rig. The multiple monitors flared to life, casting a cool blue glow across the dark room. As soon as the secure email client initialized, a cascade of high-priority security alerts flooded my secondary monitor. The notifications were startling. They were not spam. They were automated defense warnings triggered by repeated unauthorized access attempts across my entire digital footprint. Someone was currently trying to execute a brute force password reset on my professional LinkedIn account. Another alert indicated suspicious login activity on my industry networking portals. A third warning showed an entity attempting to bypass the two-factor authentication on my personal email using the forgot my password security questions. The strategy was terrifyingly clear. My family was not satisfied with merely stalling my promotion. They were launching a coordinated digital siege. They wanted to scorch the earth. If they could successfully breach my professional networking accounts, they could delete my connections, wipe my endorsement history, and send erratic messages to recruiters. They were trying to erase my digital reputation so I could not pivot to a new firm once the fake police report inevitably resulted in my termination. They wanted me entirely unemployable. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. A lesser analyst would have panicked and immediately locked the accounts, changing all the passwords to block the attack. But blocking an intruder only stops the current assault. It does not provide evidence of who launched it. I decided to leave the door cracked open. I routed the incoming traffic through a diagnostic trace program. The software analyzed the repeated pinging requests, stripping away the superficial routing layers to expose the originating signal. It took less than 3 minutes to isolate the digital fingerprint. The network address attempting the breach was not masked by a virtual private network. The attackers were arrogant enough to use a standard residential internet service provider. I cross-referenced the network data with public geolocation registries. The coordinates pinpointed a specific node in Sedgwick County. The Sedgwick County node mapped perfectly to my parents' suburban home in Wichita. Richard and Patricia were sitting in their living room, actively trying to dismantle my professional life, while Jessica texted me mock sympathy. The sheer malice of the act was staggering, but I did not let the anger distract me. I needed more than just a location ping. I needed to see exactly what they were doing inside their own network. I initiated a countermeasure, known in the cybersecurity field as a honeypot. A honeypot is a digital trap. It is an asset placed specifically to attract an attacker appearing vulnerable and valuable, but secretly engineered to capture the intruder's data the moment they interact with it. I quickly coded a false directory, disguised as a cloud storage backup of my master password list. I embedded a micro-tracking script directly into the file architecture. I manipulated the routing protocols to make the honeypot visible to the Sedgwick County network address currently hammering my security gates. I pushed the false directory to the edge of my network firewall and left it exposed. Then I leaned back in my chair and waited. The silence in my apartment felt thick. The blue light from the monitors reflected in the glass of the window pane. I watched the live traffic logs scroll down the screen in endless columns of green text. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I began to wonder if they had given up their assault. At the 22-minute mark, the server logs spiked. A red alert flashed on my primary monitor. The Wichita network address had discovered the honeypot. The intruder, believing they had found the mother lode, initiated a download sequence to pull the false password directory onto their local machine. "Got you," I whispered to the empty room. The moment the file breached their local network, the embedded tracking script executed its primary function. It did not steal their personal data or corrupt their hard drive. That would be illegal. Instead, the script performed a highly specific diagnostic handshake. It mapped the active outgoing traffic of the host computer for exactly 5 seconds. It took a snapshot of what my father was currently transmitting from his machine while he was downloading my fake file. The script successfully relayed the diagnostic packet back to my server before terminating itself to leave no trace. I opened the returning data packet with surgical precision. The packet contained the metadata of an outgoing email transmission sent from my father's computer. He was attaching a document to an external recipient. The script had captured a low-resolution cache image of the attached document. I expanded the cached image on my main monitor. It was a formal letter written on standard white digital paper. The header displayed my name, Isabel Taylor, Senior Corporate Risk Analyst. The body of the text was an enthusiastic professional endorsement, praising a candidate for their unparalleled work ethic, their sharp analytical skills, and their unwavering moral compass. The bottom of the page bore a perfect digital reproduction of my own cursive signature. They had forged a letter of recommendation from me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read the recipient address and the captured email metadata. The destination was not a random local business. The email was addressed directly to the primary inbox of the Human Resources Department at my Overland Park logistics firm. My father was sending a forged endorsement from my own supposed email address directly to the corporate office that had just placed me on administrative leave. I stared at the glowing document, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the delusion. Who were they recommending? Who could possibly benefit from a forged endorsement submitted in the middle of a fake felony crisis? I zoomed in on the body paragraph of the letter to read the name of the candidate I was supposedly vouching for. The letters sharpened into focus on my screen. I recommend without hesitation my sister Jessica Taylor to fill the upcoming vacancy in the senior risk department. The audacity was so profound it bordered on insanity. My parents had not just sent a fake police report to get me fired. They had engineered a complete corporate coup. They were trying to create a high-paying vacancy at my prestigious firm so they could immediately slide their golden child into my empty chair. They actually believed corporate hiring functioned like a royal succession. They thought forging my signature would grant Jessica the keys to my kingdom. They were sending the Trojan horse straight through the front gates. I sat in the glow of my monitors and let the magnitude of my family's delusion wash over me. They were not just trying to force me into submission. They were attempting a hostile corporate takeover of my exact job title. If I called David right now and exposed the forged recommendation letter, my parents would immediately realize I had intercepted their communication. They would delete their hard drives. They would destroy the local evidence. They would claim a hacker had spoofed their network address. I could not afford to scare them into hiding. When you are dealing with corporate fraud, the most dangerous thing you can do is let the embezzler know you are auditing the books. You have to let them think they are outsmarting you. You have to make them complacent. Predators only make fatal mistakes when they believe the prey has already stopped breathing. I powered down my server array and stood up from my desk. The time for digital surveillance was over. I needed a physical diversion. I needed a red herring. I grabbed my car keys and drove to a large hardware supply store a few miles from my apartment complex. The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt, but my mind was operating in total shade. I walked down the wide concrete aisles until I found the moving supplies. I loaded 20 heavy-duty cardboard boxes onto a flatbed cart. I added 3 rolls of clear packing tape and a thick, permanent marker. I paid with a secondary credit card that was not linked to the Frozen Legacy account and loaded the supplies into my trunk. Back at my apartment, I went to work setting the stage. I did not just scatter the boxes. I engineered a scene of sudden, catastrophic defeat. I assembled 10 of the cardboard squares, leaving the flaps open. I pulled books off my shelves and dumped them haphazardly into the nearest container. I took my winter coats from the hall closet and draped them over the back of the sofa. I dragged a roll of packing tape across a seam, letting the loud screeching sound echo against the walls. I wanted the living room to look like the epicenter of a panic attack. I wanted it to look like the home of a woman who had just lost her lucrative career and was desperately packing up her life to retreat to her childhood bedroom. I stepped back and surveyed the chaos. The illusion was perfect. 40 minutes later, a sharp knock rattled my front door. I did not flinch. I walked quietly to the entryway and peered through the small glass peephole. Standing in the hallway, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, was my sister Jessica. The drive from Wichita to Overland Park takes nearly 3 hours on a good day. For Jessica to be standing on my welcome mat right now meant she had to have left her house the exact minute my father faxed the fake police report to my boss. She had driven across the state of Kansas just to watch the wreckage unfold in real time. I closed my eyes and prepared my face. I ran a hand through my hair to make it look unkempt. I dropped my shoulders, letting my posture slump forward. I slowed my breathing to mimic the shallow gasps of someone holding back tears. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Jessica pushed her way inside before I could even say hello. "Oh, sweetie," she crooned, wrapping her arms around my shoulders in a stiff, unnatural embrace. "I came as soon as I heard the terrible news." She pulled back and scanned my face, searching for the devastation she had driven 3 hours to witness. Her eyes darted past my shoulder and landed on the chaos of my living room. She saw the open cardboard boxes. She saw the scattered books and the half-wrapped winter coats. A micro-expression of pure, radiant triumph flashed across her features. Her lips twitched upward at the corners. For one fraction of a second, she looked like a lottery winner. Then she remembered the script and forced her face back into a mask of deep pity. "You are already packing," she said softly. Her voice carried a manufactured sadness. but I could hear the thrill humming just beneath the surface. I played my part. I looked down at the floor, avoiding her gaze. "They took my corporate badge," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly on the final syllable. "They escorted me out of the building, Jessica. Human Resources placed me on leave. I do not know what I am going to do. The promotion is gone." Jessica walked further into the apartment, stepping around a stray moving box. She ran her manicured fingers over the edge of my dining table. "Mom and Dad are worried sick about you, Isabel. We know you have made some huge mistakes. We know you are in serious legal trouble. But family is family." She paused, letting the silence stretch. She was waiting for me to beg. She was waiting for me to surrender my independence and admit I was helpless without them. "I cannot afford the rent here without my salary," I said, wrapping my arms around my own waist to project vulnerability. "You do not have to worry about rent," Jessica replied quickly. Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of the trap snapping shut. "Mom and Dad have your old bedroom ready. You can move your things into the Wichita house this weekend. We will figure out the police situation together. You just need to come home and let us take care of you." The psychological warfare in the room was suffocating. My sister was offering me a lifeline woven entirely out of poison. She was acting as the generous savior while actively applying for the job she had just helped steal from me. "I will think about it," I muttered, staring blankly at the wall. "I just need to finish putting my life into these boxes." Jessica patted my arm with condescending affection. "You take your time, sweetie. I am going to head back and let Mom know you are safe. We will expect you on Sunday." She turned and walked out the front door. She did not offer to help me pack a single item. She did not ask if I needed anything to eat. Her mission was complete. She had verified my destruction. I stood in the entryway and listened to her footsteps fade down the carpeted hallway. I heard the distant chime of the elevator arriving to take her down to the lobby. The moment the heavy metal doors slid shut, my slumped posture vanished. I stood up straight. I smoothed my hair back into place. I walked over to the window and looked down at the parking lot. 2 minutes later, Jessica emerged from the building. She was practically skipping across the pavement. I watched her pull her cell phone from her purse and dial a number before she even reached her car. She was calling Richard and Patricia to report the ultimate victory. They believed I was broken. They believed the game was over. I turned away from the window and walked toward my kitchen counter. I ignored the empty cardboard boxes scattered across my floor. The red herring had served its exact purpose. My family was now operating under the illusion of total control. I reached into a small plastic shopping bag sitting near the sink. I had made a second stop after the hardware store. I reached inside the bag and pulled out my purchase. It was a sleek, voice-activated digital audio recorder. The casing was matte black, and the microphone sensitivity was rated for legal dictation. I pressed my thumb against the power button. The small digital screen illuminated, casting a faint green glow over my fingertips. I slipped the device into my coat pocket. My family thought they had successfully executed a hostile takeover of my life. They had no idea I was about to invite them into an audit they could never escape. The drive down Interstate 35 from Overland Park to Wichita took exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes. The flat Kansas landscape rolled past my windows in a blur of dormant fields and gray highway concrete. I kept the radio off. I needed the silence to rehearse the performance I was about to deliver. I was driving straight into the lion den, but I was not walking in as prey. I was walking in as the architect of an audit. Before I pulled into my parents' suburban neighborhood, I pulled my vehicle onto the shoulder of a quiet side street. I put the car in park and reached into my passenger seat. I unzipped the main compartment of my leather handbag and retrieved the digital audio recorder I purchased the previous day. I slid my thumb over the power switch. The small display illuminated, confirming the battery was full and the storage drive was empty. I activated the recording function. I watched the decibel meter bounce as it picked up the ambient sound of the engine. I slipped the device deep into the lining of my purse, ensuring the microphone remained unobstructed. I put the car in gear and drove the remaining 3 blocks to my childhood home. The familiar red brick facade of the house looked exactly the same as it did 5 years ago. The lawn was manicured, the hedges were trimmed with geometric precision. It was a house designed to project an image of respectable, upper-middle-class stability. It was the perfect camouflage for the rot operating inside the walls. I parked in the driveway, took a deep breath, and walked to the front porch. I rang the doorbell once. The heavy oak door swung open. Patricia stood in the foyer, wearing a crisp floral apron over a navy blouse. Her face arranged itself into a mask of maternal concern. She reached out and pulled me into a stiff, unnatural embrace. She patted my back with rhythmic, hollow taps. "Isabel, you look so thin," she murmured. Her voice held that specific, coded sweetness she always used when she felt she held the upper hand. "Come inside. Your father is pouring drinks in the living room." I stepped over the threshold, and the smell of roasted carrots and seared beef hit the air. It was the scent of countless Sunday dinners from my youth. Dinners where I was told my career aspirations were selfish. Dinners where I was reminded that family loyalty meant funding my sister Jessica and ignoring my own future. Richard walked into the hallway holding a crystal glass of scotch. He wore a pressed button-down shirt and khaki trousers. He did not hug me. He offered a firm nod, projecting the stoic authority of a patriarch navigating a crisis. "Good of you to make the drive, Isabel," he said, taking a sip of his amber liquid. "Let us sit down. The food is ready." We moved to the formal dining room. The table was set with the good china and polished silver. I placed my leather handbag on the floor directly beneath my chair. The hidden microphone was positioned perfectly to capture every word spoken in the room. Richard carved the pot roast with deliberate, slow strokes of the knife. He served Patricia first, then me, then himself. The clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed in the stifling quiet. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the exhausted, defeated daughter they believed Jessica had witnessed the day before. I lowered my eyes to my plate and let my shoulders droop. I pushed a piece of carrot around in circles with my fork. I modeled the exact physical posture of a woman whose spirit had been crushed. So Richard began, his tone casual, but his eyes fixed sharply on my face. "Jessica mentioned your apartment is full of moving boxes. She said things are rather turbulent at the logistics firm." I kept my gaze fixed on the table linen. "They placed me on administrative leave," I whispered, making sure my voice wavered. "Human Resources confiscated my corporate badge. I do not know if I have a job to go back to on Monday." Richard sighed. He set his fork down and folded his hands together. "Corporate environments are notoriously unforgiving," he lectured. "They demand loyalty, but they offer none in return. When a person encounters legal troubles, those companies cut ties instantly to protect their stock price. It is a harsh reality." I felt a surge of pure, cold satisfaction. The hidden recorder captured his exact phrasing. I had never mentioned the fake police report to Jessica. I had only said they escorted me out. By bringing up legal troubles, Richard had just admitted he possessed knowledge of the fabricated felony. He was handing me the rope to hang him with. Patricia reached into the pocket of her floral apron. She pulled out a tri-folded piece of glossy paper and slid it across the polished dining table. The paper stopped right next to my water glass. I looked down. It was a promotional brochure for Whispering Pines, a low-income apartment complex located on the outskirts of Wichita. "Just in case the Overland Park situation becomes untenable," Patricia said softly. Her eyes gleamed with predatory warmth. "We know the rent in your current city is exorbitant. When things inevitably fall apart, you cannot be left out on the street. Whispering Pines is affordable. It is only 10 minutes from our house. We can keep a close eye on you while you rebuild your life." She was outlining the final phase of their trap. They wanted me destitute, stripped of my prestigious title, and forced to live in a cheap complex down the road so they could monitor my every move. They wanted the independent risk analyst reduced to a dependent child. "I cannot afford a new security deposit," I said, letting a note of genuine-sounding panic bleed into my words. "My bank accounts are frozen. Someone locked my primary checking ledger yesterday." Patricia did not even flinch. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin felt like ice. Financial institutions panic at the first sign of criminal liability, Isabel, she said smoothly. But family is your real safety net. We will cover the deposit for the Wichita apartment. We will help you transition back to reality. I pulled my hand out from under hers, pretending to wipe a tear from my cheek. I thanked them for their generosity. I thanked them for not abandoning me in my darkest hour. The dramatic irony vibrating in the room was almost thick enough to taste. They sat there radiating smug triumph, convinced they had successfully manipulated the trajectory of my entire life. They had no idea their voices were currently being digitized into evidence files that would tear their world apart. I took a slow breath and pushed my chair back from the table. I told them I needed to use the restroom to compose myself. Patricia nodded sympathetically and told me to take my time. I walked out of the dining room and stepped into the long central hallway. I knew the architecture of this house by heart. I knew which floorboards creaked and which doors possessed oiled hinges. I bypassed the guest bathroom entirely. I moved silently down the hall and stopped in front of my father's home office. The door was cracked open an inch. I pushed it gently and slipped inside the dark room. The heavy curtains were drawn, but the street lamp outside cast enough light to illuminate the space. The room smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I walked straight to the wooden credenza pushed against the far wall. Sitting on top of the credenza was a bulky gray Brother fax machine. I pulled my cellular phone from my pocket and opened the camera application. I disabled the flash and muted the shutter sound. I took a clear, high-resolution photograph of the machine, focusing specifically on the digital display screen that listed the 316 area code and the Taylor Insurance Group identification header. Then I looked down at the floor. Tucked under the edge of the heavy wooden desk was a wire mesh wastebasket. I knelt on the carpet and peered inside. The basket was mostly empty, containing only a few discarded envelopes and coffee stirrers. But resting at the very bottom was a crumpled ball of white printer paper. I reached in and pulled the paper out. I smoothed the wrinkled sheet flat against the carpet. It was a printed draft of the forged Johnson County police report. The page was covered in handwritten edits scrawled in red ink. My father's distinct block lettering crossed out specific badge numbers and replaced them with alternative digits. But the most damning piece of evidence sat in the center of the narrative paragraph. The word larceny was circled in red ink. My mother had clearly typed the draft, and my father had reviewed it. He had noticed the typo, but instead of correcting it, he had simply written the exact same misspelled word in the margin. I raised my phone and took 3 steady photographs of the smoothed paper, ensuring the red handwriting was perfectly legible. This was undeniable physical proof of the forgery taking place inside their home. I folded the draft and placed it back into the wastebasket exactly how I found it. I stood up and prepared to leave the office. I had secured the physical evidence. The audio recorder was capturing their motives. The trap was fully armed. But as I turned toward the door, my shoulder brushed against the edge of my father's desk. A stack of mail shifted, and a thick envelope slid out from the bottom of the pile. I looked down to push the envelope back into place. My hand froze, hovering over the paper. The envelope bore the official seal of the Department of the Treasury. The return address stated, Internal Revenue Service. But it was the stark red stamp printed across the center of the envelope that made the breath catch in my throat. The stamp read, Final Notice of Intent to Levy. I stared at the federal warning. The puzzle pieces suddenly shifted, realigning into a much darker picture. My parents were not just trying to force me home for the sake of psychological control. Richard's insurance agency was facing catastrophic federal tax penalties. They were drowning in debt. They were desperate for cash, and they needed my lucrative corporate salary to save them. I left the federal tax notice exactly where I found it. I slipped out of my father's dark office and walked quietly down the hallway. I splashed cold water on my face in the guest bathroom to ensure my eyes looked slightly red. When I returned to the formal dining room, the performance resumed. I ate another few bites of pot roast. I nodded meekly as Richard outlined a hypothetical budget for my life in Wichita. I let Patricia talk about how hard the transition would be, but how they would shoulder the burden together. I thanked them for dinner, retrieved my leather handbag from beneath the chair, and walked out the front door. The moment the heavy oak shut behind me, the facade dropped. My posture straightened. The manufactured grief vanished. I started the engine of my car and pulled away from the curb. The digital recorder tucked in my purse had captured every word. The photographs on my phone secured the physical proof. The trap was set. The sky over Interstate 35 was bruised with dark evening clouds. The highway stretched north toward Overland Park, empty and cold. I drove the speed limit, my mind racing through the implications of the red stamped envelope. They were not just toxic controllers, they were financially desperate. Desperation makes people sloppy. 30 miles outside of Wichita, the Bluetooth system in my car chimed violently. The incoming caller identification displayed on the dashboard screen read, Overland Property Management. I tapped a button on the steering wheel to accept the call. The voice of my leasing agent, Sarah, crackled through the speakers. She sounded flustered. She bypassed the standard pleasantries entirely. Isabel, I am so sorry to bother you on a Sunday evening, Sarah said, her voice tight with professional anxiety. I just received a highly disturbing phone call from an emergency contact listed on your resident file. A man named Richard Taylor called the emergency maintenance line. He stated he was your father and your legal proxy. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and my eyes on the white dividing lines of the highway. I did not interrupt her. I let the silence prompt her to continue. Sarah took a ragged breath. He told me you are currently facing imminent federal prison time for corporate embezzlement. He said you have suffered a complete psychological breakdown. He demanded I terminate your lease agreement immediately and allow him to send a moving crew to clear out the unit to save the family from further financial liability. He said the police would be arriving at the complex soon to seize your assets. The sheer scope of their offensive was breathtaking. The fake police report to my employer was the primary strike. The frozen legacy bank account was the secondary blow. Now Richard was actively attempting to render me homeless. He wanted me evicted and my belongings shipped to Wichita before I even had a chance to defend myself. They were trying to sever every single tether holding me to an independent life. Isabel Sarah continued, her tone shifting from anxious to sympathetic. I told him I cannot break a legal lease based on a phone call from a third party. But if the authorities are coming to seize the property, I have to notify the regional director. Are you in legal trouble? Do we need to prepare the unit for law enforcement? Sarah, I replied, my voice projecting absolute steady calm. I am currently driving back to the complex from a visit with my estranged family. I am not facing federal prison. I have not embezzled a single cent from my firm. My father is executing a targeted harassment campaign to force me to break my lease and move back to his jurisdiction. I paused, letting the cold rationality of my words cut through the panic he had instilled in her. I am a senior risk analyst, Sarah, I continued. I do not have a criminal record. When I arrive at the complex, I will hand you a physical copy of my live background check. I will provide my current bank statements, proving my rent is fully funded for the next 6 months. You will see there are no liens, no warrants, and no active investigations. I could hear the tension drain from Sarah over the cellular connection. Oh, thank God, she breathed. He sounded so convincing, Isabel. He sounded like a terrified father trying to clean up a disaster. Con men always sound convincing, Sarah. That is how they operate. I need you to do exactly 2 things for me right now. First, I need you to permanently delete Richard and Patricia Taylor from my emergency contact file. They have no legal proxy over me, and they are not authorized to make decisions regarding my tenancy. Second, I need you to flag my unit file. If anyone other than myself attempts to enter my apartment or break the lease, you are to call the Overland Park Police immediately. I will update the system right now, Sarah promised. Your unit is secure, Isabel. I am so sorry you are dealing with this. I ended the call and let the silence return to the cabin. The attempt to evict me was aggressive, but it was clumsy. Richard was overplaying his hand. He was throwing punches in the dark, hoping one would land a knockout blow. Then my cellular phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. The sender was a woman named Claire. She was a childhood friend who still lived in the Wichita suburbs. I had not spoken to Claire in over a year, but we remained connected on social media. I tapped the dashboard screen to read the text aloud through the voice command system. The robotic voice echoed through the car. "Hey, Isabel. I feel terrible even sending this, but your mom is at the evening service at First Baptist right now. She is sobbing in the front pew. She asked the entire congregation to form a prayer circle for you. She stood up at the pulpit and told everyone you are facing serious jail time for stealing from your employer. She said you have lost your way and the family is devastated. People are talking. I thought you should know." I gripped the steering wheel, letting the information settle. A smear campaign. Patricia was not satisfied with just attacking my professional and financial foundations. She was burning my social bridges. First Baptist was the epicenter of the Wichita suburban community. The gossip from that congregation would spread to every neighbor, every old high school acquaintance, and every distant relative within 24 hours. She was publicly framing me as a disgraced criminal before I could even explain my side of the story. She wanted to ensure that if I reached out to anyone in Wichita for help or shelter, I would be met with locked doors and suspicious glares. She wanted my reputation reduced to ash, so the only people willing to take me in were the parents generously forgiving their broken daughter. A lesser person would have pulled over immediately. They would have drafted a frantic social media post defending their honor. They would have called Claire, screaming about the lies. They would have expended precious emotional energy trying to plug the holes in the dam of public opinion. I did none of those things. I kept driving. I let the miles roll by. I do not fight rumors. Rumors are cheap. Rumors require constant feeding to survive. Patricia would have to spend the next month performing the role of the grieving mother, crying on demand, and updating the church gossips with fresh lies. Lies have to be maintained. They demand exhausting upkeep. The truth does not require maintenance. The truth just waits for the documents to be presented. I decided to let her cry at the pulpit. I decided to let the congregation pray for my supposed crimes. When the dust finally settled and the federal authorities arrived at her front door, the shockwave would be absolute. The higher she built her pedestal of righteous martyrdom, the farther the fall would shatter her. I crossed the county line into Overland Park. The glowing skyline of the city illuminated the horizon. I felt an unexpected sense of peace. I had secured my lease. I had secured the audio confession. I had secured the physical proof of the forged document. My perimeter was solid. My counteroffensive was nearly complete. I pulled into the gated entrance of my apartment complex. I bypassed the main office and parked in my assigned covered spot. I turned off the ignition and plunged the car into darkness. I sat for a moment, staring at the concrete pillar in front of my bumper. I was exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a heavy physical ache in my shoulders. I reached for the door handle, ready to walk up to my unit and finally sleep. My phone chimed from the cup holder. It was a sharp, high-pitched electronic tone. It was not a text message. It was not a phone call. It was a push notification from the secure credit monitoring application I maintained for my personal finances. I picked up the device and tapped the screen to view the alert. The banner read, "Critical update to credit profile." I frowned. I had monitored my credit intensely since the morning my bank account was frozen. My score was excellent. My utilization was low. There was no reason for a critical system alert at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. I opened the application and verified my biometric identity. The dashboard loaded. My credit score had just plummeted 120 points. I stared at the catastrophic number. A drop that severe only happens when a major negative mark is applied to a primary ledger. I navigated to the Recent Changes tab to view the source of the hemorrhage. The screen populated a single-line item. It was a hard default status applied by a third-party collections agency. The notification indicated that a delinquent debt had just transitioned from a passive warning phase into active legal recovery. I squinted at the screen, trying to decipher the origin. 5 years ago, I noticed a soft inquiry on my credit report from a regional bank. I was transitioning out of college at the time and assumed it was an automated promotional pull. I ignored it. It sat dormant on my file for half a decade. That soft inquiry had just metamorphosed into a devastating legal strike. I tapped the line item to expand the details of the defaulted debt. The text loaded onto the screen, rendering the numbers in stark black font. The collections agency was filing for wage garnishment based on a defaulted personal signature loan. The principal balance of the loan was exactly $25,000. I stared at the catastrophic number glowing on my cellular screen. $25,000. The figure hung in the dark cabin of my vehicle like a physical weight. It was not a random sequence of digits. I had seen that exact monetary value less than 3 hours ago. The memory flashed in my mind with razor-sharp clarity. I pictured the dark wooden credenza in my father's Wichita home office. I pictured the thick envelope jutting out from beneath a stack of scattered mail. The return address read, Internal Revenue Service. The red ink stamped across the center declared a final notice of intent to levy. Richard was drowning in a catastrophic tax penalty. The amount he owed the federal government was $25,000. I locked my phone and stepped out of the car. The cold Kansas night air hit my face, but I barely felt the chill. I walked toward my building, navigating the concrete stairs with measured, automatic steps. My mind was rapidly reassembling the entire architecture of the conflict. The narrative I had believed all morning was fundamentally flawed. I thought my family was executing a petty revenge scheme to punish me for my independence. I thought they wanted to destroy my lucrative career so I would be forced to crawl back to my childhood bedroom in defeat. That was a gross underestimation of their depravity. I unlocked my apartment door and threw the deadbolt shut behind me. I did not turn on the living room lamps. I walked straight into my office and powered up my primary server rig. The monitors flickered, casting their familiar blue light across the walls. I bypassed my standard consumer credit applications and logged directly into the Deep Archive Credit Bureau clearinghouse. This was the raw, secured database financial institutions use to underwrite mortgages and trace historical debt. I entered my Social Security number and initiated a full historical pull. The data populated across my screen in dense chronological rows. I scrolled past the pristine records of my auto payments and my flawless credit card history. I dug straight to the bottom of the ledger, targeting the 5-year-old soft inquiry. The digital file expanded, revealing the anatomy of a federal crime. 5 years ago, during the exact month I moved out of the Wichita house and stopped subsidizing Jessica the financial instrument, was opened. It was an unsecured personal signature debt. The promissory note was originated using my full legal name, my date of birth, and my Social Security number. The funds were dispersed into an external routing destination. Richard and Patricia had not just sabotaged my employment. They had stolen my identity. They had signed my name in blood to secure the capital necessary to pay off their failing insurance agency tax penalties. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and studied the life cycle of the illicit ledger. For the first few years, the perpetrators made minimal monthly payments to keep the account in good standing, preventing any red flags from appearing on my primary consumer reports. But eventually, the funds ran dry. The payments ceased. The account slipped into delinquency and was quietly sold to a third-party collections firm. That firm had just initiated active legal recovery. In the state of Kansas, when a collection agency secures a default judgment on a personal debt, they do not politely ask the debtor for a check. They file a wage garnishment order. A judge signs a writ and sends it directly to the payroll department of the debtor's employer. The company is legally compelled to slice a percentage out of the employee's paycheck before the funds ever hit their bank account. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. If the collections agency sent a wage garnishment order to the logistics firm in Overland Park, the Human Resources Department would notify me immediately. I would be presented with a federal debt I never authorized. I would instantly investigate the origin of the promissory note. I would trace the funds to the Wichita Insurance Agency. I would uncover the identity theft, and I would press charges. My parents knew the garnishment order was coming. They knew their federal crime was about to be exposed by my own payroll department. They needed the garnishment to bounce. They needed the collection agency to hit a brick wall. If the Overland Park firm terminated my employment, there would be no wages to garnish. The legal order would be returned to the sender marked as invalid due to job loss. The collections firm would be forced to restart their asset search from scratch. Getting me fired was not an act of toxic jealousy. It was a calculated delay tactic. They forged the police report to stall a federal fraud investigation. They were trying to buy themselves time to figure out a new scheme to cover their tracks. I took my phone out of my pocket and opened the clock application. I set a digital timer for exactly 60 seconds. I pressed start and placed the device face up on the desk. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to mourn. I mourned the parents I thought I had. I mourned the childhood I thought was real. I let the grief of total betrayal wash over me. The people who raised me did not view me as a daughter. I was merely an asset to be liquidated. When my physical wallet closed, they simply reached into the ether and stole my financial future. They sold my clean name to buy themselves a few more years of suburban comfort. They would have gladly watched me plunge into bankruptcy and legal ruin just to protect their own fragile ego. The digital numbers on the phone screen ticked down. The silence in the room was absolute. My chest tightened with a profound, hollow sorrow. I recognized the pain. I felt its weight. Then the 60 seconds expired. The timer emitted a sharp, concluding chime. I opened my eyes. The grief evaporated, leaving behind a sterile, hyper-focused void. The daughter who wanted to be loved was gone. The senior corporate risk analyst remained. I placed my hands on the mechanical keyboard. The time for passive observation was over. If I was going to dismantle a federal identity theft ring operating out of a residential living room, I needed the foundational paperwork. I routed my connection through a secure virtual protocol to mask my internal location. I accessed the portal of the original lending institution that issued the $25,000 promissory note 5 years ago. Because the debt was legally attached to my Social Security number, I possessed the lawful right to request the origination package. I navigated the automated document retrieval system, verifying my identity through a series of complex data checkpoints. The lending server authenticated my request. A secured file downloaded directly to my encrypted hard drive. I opened the document viewer. The original application form appeared on my secondary monitor. The document was a masterpiece of deception. The fields were populated with my exact demographic details. My previous addresses were listed with perfect chronological accuracy. The digital signature at the bottom of the final page matched the stylistic curve of the forgery I had intercepted from their network earlier that afternoon. But identity thieves always face one specific hurdle when securing high capital funding. Lenders require employment verification. They need proof that the applicant possesses the income necessary to service the obligation. I scrolled to the second page of the application targeting the employment history section. I needed to see how Richard and Patricia bypassed the income verification protocol without triggering an alert to my actual workplace. The text rendered clearly on the glowing screen. The perpetrators had listed my correct job title. They had listed the correct Overland Park corporate address for the logistics firm. Then my eyes dropped to the designated contact field. The lender required the specific name and direct telephone line of the human resources representative authorized to confirm the applicant's employment status. I stared at the name typed into the application box. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The contact listed was Evelyn. Evelyn was the reigning director of human resources at my firm. She was the exact executive who received the forged police report this morning. She was the woman who had personally placed me on administrative leave. My parents had not used a fake verification service. They had listed my actual corporate director on a fraudulent federal document 5 years ago. The crimes were no longer isolated. The digital siege, the fake police report, the stolen identity, and the impending wage garnishment were all converging on one specific office in Overland Park. My family had unknowingly dragged a multi-million-dollar logistics corporation into the center of a federal wire fraud conspiracy. I leaned forward, reading Evelyn's name over and over again. The puzzle was complete. I knew exactly how to construct the snare. I downloaded the complete origination package, saving the application form to a dedicated, encrypted folder on my primary drive. I labeled the directory Project Audit. I began dragging every piece of gathered evidence into the newly created vault. The audio recording from the Sunday dinner, the high-resolution photographs of the crumpled draft, the network traffic logs proving the digital intrusion, the bank fraud call tracking number. The puzzle pieces were falling into perfect alignment. I was building a federal indictment from my desk chair. My focus was absolute. I was so immersed in the architecture of the defense that I did not immediately notice the flashing lights reflecting off my living room wall. It was a rapid strobing rhythm of red and blue. The colors bounced against the half-packed cardboard boxes, painting the space with a sudden, harsh urgency. I paused my keystrokes and turned my head. A heavy, metallic knock echoed through the quiet apartment. The sound was not a polite request for entry. It was the sharp, authoritative strike of law enforcement demanding attention. I stood up and walked down the short hallway toward the front entrance. I did not feel fear. I felt the specific, cold calculation of anticipating a hostile move. The attempt to break my lease had failed. The smear campaign at the church had failed to draw a response. The digital siege was currently blocked. Richard was running out of external avenues to exert control. He was escalating to direct physical intimidation. I peered through the glass peephole. 2 officers from the Overland Park Police Department stood on my welcome mat. They wore standard dark uniforms with heavy utility belts. The taller officer rested his hand near his radio. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door wide open. I did not hide behind the frame. I stood squarely in the threshold, meeting their gaze with steady, professional composure. "Good evening, officers," I said, my voice projecting calm authority. "How can I assist you tonight?" The taller officer shifted his weight. His eyes performed a rapid assessment of my appearance. I was wearing a clean sweater and slacks. My hair was neat. My posture was relaxed. He glanced past my shoulder, taking in the scattered moving boxes in the living room, before returning his focus to my face. "Are you Isabel Taylor?" he asked. His tone was professional, but edged with caution. "I am," I replied. "We received a call dispatching a priority wellness check to this address," the officer stated. The caller identified himself as your father, Richard Taylor. He reported you are experiencing a severe psychological crisis. He stated you are facing imminent incarceration and have made explicit threats of self-harm. We are here to ensure you are not a danger to yourself or others. The sheer malice of the tactic was breathtaking. Weaponizing emergency services against a family member is a hallmark of extreme domestic control. Richard knew the Overland Park authorities would dispatch armed officers to my door based on his fabricated panic. He wanted me terrified. He wanted me humiliated in front of my neighbors. He hoped the stress of an unexpected police interrogation would finally crack my resolve, forcing me to call him, begging for salvation. He severely underestimated my training. I did not act outraged. I did not raise my voice or frantically deny the accusations. When law enforcement arrives for a wellness check, erratic behavior only confirms the caller's narrative. "Officers, please come inside," I said, stepping back and gesturing toward my living room. I welcome the intervention. It will actually be very helpful to have this incident documented on the official county record. The 2 policemen exchanged a brief look of surprise. Typically, subjects of a wellness check are defensive or combative. My absolute transparency disarmed their initial tension. They stepped over the threshold and stood near the kitchen island. I walked over to the dining table and picked up my leather portfolio. I understand my father painted a very alarming picture. I explained, keeping my cadence steady. Allow me to provide the actual context. My family is currently executing a coordinated financial and professional harassment campaign against me. They are attempting to force me to abandon my independent life and move back to their jurisdiction. I opened the portfolio and withdrew a printed copy of my live background check. I handed the document to the taller officer. I am a senior risk analyst for a logistics corporation right here in Overland Park, I stated. As you can see from the certified query I pulled this morning, I have no criminal record. There are no warrants for my arrest. The claim that I am facing incarceration is entirely fabricated. The officer studied the paper. He nodded slowly, recognizing the official state clearinghouse format. I walked over to my desk and retrieved my tablet. I brought up the photographs I had taken inside my father's Wichita home office. I displayed the image of the crumpled fax draft. This morning, my father utilized his insurance agency facsimile machine to send a forged Johnson County incident report to my employer. I continued swiping to the next image to show the header data. The forgery falsely claimed I was arrested for grand larceny. The goal was to secure my immediate termination so I would be rendered financially destitute. The second officer leaned in to examine the glowing screen. The text was clearly altered. The fake badge numbers were circled in red ink. "My lease is currently secured," I said, gesturing to the scattered boxes. I staged these moving supplies to make an unannounced visiting relative believe their intimidation tactics were working. It was a strategic misdirection to gather evidence. I am not experiencing a psychological breakdown. I am methodically documenting a severe case of targeted domestic harassment and federal identity theft. The taller officer handed the background check back to me. His posture relaxed entirely. His hand dropped away from his utility belt. The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by professional mutual respect. He recognized he was not dealing with a hysterical crisis victim. He was dealing with a professional auditor who had already built an ironclad defense perimeter. Miss Taylor, the taller officer, said, his tone shifting to genuine sympathy. "We deal with weaponized emergency calls more often than you might think. Estranged relatives frequently utilize the dispatch system to exert control. We can clearly see you are in no danger of self-harm." "I appreciate your diligence, officer," I replied. "However, since my father initiated a false 911 report claiming a fictitious emergency, I need this interaction formally cataloged. I will be filing for an aggressive restraining order and submitting a brief to the federal authorities regarding the identity theft. I need the documentation from tonight to prove the pattern of escalation." The officer pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket. "Absolutely," he agreed, clicking his pen. He wrote down 2 distinct sequences of numbers and tore the sheet from the binding. He handed the paper to me. "These are our official badge numbers," he explained. "The second sequence is the primary incident report number for this dispatch call. The narrative will explicitly state the subject was found in excellent mental health, exhibiting no signs of distress, and that the reporting party provided false information regarding a fictitious legal emergency. You can use this report number to subpoena the dispatch audio if your legal counsel requires it for the restraining order." "Thank you, gentlemen," I said, securing the paper inside my portfolio. "You have provided exactly what I needed to complete my file." "We are sorry you are dealing with this situation," the second officer added as they turned toward the exit. "If he attempts to escalate further, do not hesitate to contact the precinct directly." I escorted them to the door and locked the deadbolt behind them. The red and blue lights stopped flashing against my living room wall as the cruiser pulled away from the curb. The apartment returned to its quiet baseline. Richard had fired his heaviest psychological artillery. He expected an explosion. Instead, his attack had simply delivered the final piece of foundational evidence I required. The false police report incident number was the ultimate proof of malicious intent. My defense perimeter was now unbreachable. I walked back into my office to scan the newly acquired document into my encrypted vault. The moment I placed the paper on the scanner bed, the primary monitor on my desk flared to life. An incoming message notification appeared in the center of the screen. It was an electronic mail alert linked directly to my corporate communication portal. The system permitted remote access for executives handling critical off-site emergencies. The message was tagged with a bright red high-priority icon indicating urgent executive correspondence. I leaned forward and checked the sender identification. The message was not from my direct manager, David. The transmission originated from the highest level of the human resources hierarchy. The sender was Evelyn, the director of human resources. The timing was impeccable. The corporate machine was finally moving. I clicked the icon to open the encrypted transmission. The subject line consisted of exactly 4 words: critical employment data intercepted. I read the opening sentence, and the air in the room grew perfectly still. The snare was ready to close. I clicked the encrypted link embedded in the message. The screen transitioned to the secure human resources portal. Evelyn had forwarded a direct application packet submitted through the external corporate hiring gateway. The applicant name at the top of the digital dossier was Jessica Taylor. The audacity was no longer a theoretical concept trapped in my server logs. It was a formal submission sitting on an executive desk. I opened the attached cover letter. The text was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Jessica did not merely list her mediocre qualifications. She framed her application as an act of noble familial duty. The opening paragraph stated she was stepping in to repair the Taylor family reputation with the firm following her sister's sudden and unfortunate departure. She was standing on my corporate grave before the dirt was even tossed. I scrolled to the second attachment. It was the forged letter of recommendation I had intercepted during the digital honeypot trap earlier that afternoon. The document bore my forged digital signature praising Jessica for her unwavering moral compass and sharp analytical mind. They genuinely believed an enterprise-level logistics corporation would accept a recommendation letter from a supposedly disgraced felon without verifying the source. It was a spectacular underestimation of corporate vetting protocols. I did not reply to the email. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct cellular number for the Director of Human Resources. Evelyn answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, lacking the standard corporate pleasantries. "Isabel," she said, "I assume you read the dossier." "I am looking at it right now, Evelyn," I replied, my eyes tracking over Jessica's inflated resume. Evelyn let out a breath of profound frustration. In my 20 years of managing personnel risk, I have never seen a family attempt to leverage a termination into a direct succession. This Jessica applied for the senior analyst vacancy created the exact moment I placed you on administrative leave. She attached a recommendation letter, supposedly signed by you. I ran the metadata on the submission. It originated from a Wichita routing address. "The Wichita address belongs to my parents," I stated, keeping my tone clinical. "They are the architects of the entire scenario." Evelyn paused. The silence on the line indicated she was shifting from an HR director dealing with a strange application to a corporate executive dealing with an active security threat. "Walk me through it, Isabel. Give me the raw data." I delivered the briefing with the precision of a board presentation. I did not waste time on emotional grievances. I laid out the timeline. I detailed the forged police report sent from my father's insurance agency fax machine. I explained the targeted digital siege on my professional network and the honeypot trap that captured the recommendation letter. I told her about the fake wellness check the Overland Park police just concluded at my apartment. Then I dropped the heaviest piece of the ledger onto the table. "This is not just an employment dispute, Evelyn," I continued. 5 years ago, Richard and Patricia Taylor utilized my Social Security number to secure a $25,000 personal loan. The funds were used to cover an impending Internal Revenue Service tax levy against my father's business. That fraudulent loan just entered default status this evening. A third-party collections agency is currently moving to secure a wage garnishment order. I heard the squeak of leather as Evelyn sat up straight in her chair. A wage garnishment. Yes, I confirmed. If that order reaches your desk, you would immediately alert me. I would uncover the identity theft. They needed me terminated to ensure the garnishment bounced. They needed the legal order returned to sender due to job loss, buying them time to hide their assets. And they used my name on the origination paperwork, Evelyn realized, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You said the employment verification contact listed on the fraudulent loan application was me. They dragged the firm into a federal wire fraud conspiracy, I replied. They used your authority to secure illicit capital. They assumed human resources departments never check historical data on routine employment verification calls. The line grew quiet for several seconds. When Evelyn finally spoke, the sympathetic human resources director was gone. She was replaced by a corporate titan protecting her fortress. I was prepared to simply reject the application and hand the forged police report over to our legal department, she said. Her words were measured, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. But rejecting Jessica allows them to walk away. They attempted to defraud this company. They used my name on a federal financial document. We are not just going to decline the interview, Isabel. We are going to audit them. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The alignment of our interests was perfect. The corporate machine was aligning its crosshairs on the Wichita House. How do we structure the engagement, I asked. Evelyn outlined the mechanism with ruthless efficiency. Corporate risk policy dictates that when a concerning legal document intersects with a hiring action, the firm must perform a documented compliance review to protect shareholders from liability. I will invite Jessica to a fast-tracked remote video interview for the senior analyst position, Evelyn explained. The invitation will appear as a standard executive vetting process. However, I will embed a mandatory compliance requirement. Due to the sensitive nature of the police report submitted regarding your employment, I will require Richard and Patricia to join the call as formal character references. They believe their plan worked flawlessly. I noted, analyzing the psychology of the trap. They will assume the request is a mere formality to finalize Jessica's hiring. They are desperate for the salary this job provides. They will not risk turning down a direct invitation from the hiring director. Exactly, Evelyn agreed. We will place them on a recorded corporate line. We will secure their legal consent for the documentation. We will ask them to verify their submission of the forged police report on camera. Once they commit to the lie on a recorded federal transmission, we will close the doors. Will legal counsel be present, I asked. Our chief litigator will be sitting right next to me, Evelyn confirmed. The legal department needs to be present to authorize the transfer of the recording to the state authorities. And you will be in the room as well, off camera. They need to confess before we reveal the scope of the investigation. I looked at the encrypted vault folder on my desktop. I have the audio recording of their motives from Sunday dinner. I have the IP tracking logs proving the digital intrusion. I have the origination documents for the defaulted loan bearing Richard's digital signature. I will build the presentation. We can broadcast it directly to their screen during the conference. Have it ready by tomorrow morning, Evelyn instructed. I am sending the invitation to Jessica right now. We execute the snare at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. The call disconnected. I placed my phone on the desk. The exhaustion that had been creeping into my bones vanished, replaced by a sharp, singular focus. Evelyn had just handed me the keys to the corporate arena. My parents thought they could wage a shadow war from the comfort of their suburban living room. They thought they could manipulate my life without ever facing the consequences of their actions. They were wrong. The execution phase was initiated. Evelyn was leveraging the full weight of corporate policy to force them into the light. The Taylor family was about to walk into a glass room with no exits, and I was holding the lock. A blind copy of the official corporate invitation landed in my secure inbox 12 minutes after my phone call with Evelyn concluded. I opened the transmission and read the text. The phrasing was a testament to executive warfare. It was wrapped in polite professional jargon, but designed to function as an inescapable legal net. Evelyn wrote that the firm was highly impressed with Jessica's submitted dossier. She offered a fast-tracked remote video interview for the senior risk analyst position scheduled for the following afternoon. Then came the compliance caveat. Evelyn explained that because the Human Resources Department recently received a disturbing legal document regarding my employment corporate policy, dictated a mandatory risk verification assessment. The email stated that to proceed with the hiring process, the firm required Richard and Patricia Taylor to join the video conference. They were requested to formally vouch for Jessica as the designated family proxy and to provide context regarding the police report they submitted. It was the perfect bait. The language validated their delusion. It made them feel powerful and respected by a multi-million-dollar logistics enterprise. It implied the company was grateful for their intervention and eager to replace a disgraced employee with a stable, loyal sibling. I left the email open on my secondary monitor and watched my incoming server traffic. 45 minutes later, Evelyn forwarded me the official response. The reply was sent from Jessica's personal address, but the arrogant tone belonged entirely to Richard. They accepted the invitation. They confirmed all three of them would be present on the video feed at 2 o'clock the next day. They expressed their deep appreciation for the firm's swift action regarding my supposed criminal status. They took the bait without a single moment of hesitation. They were sprinting toward the edge of a cliff, believing it was a staircase. The execution phase required a flawless presentation. I powered down my communication portals and severed my external internet connection to prevent any digital interruptions. The apartment was silent, save for the low hum of my desktop processor cooling fans. I spent the remainder of the evening constructing the snare. When you prepare evidence for a corporate legal counsel, you do not build a narrative filled with emotional grievances. Lawyers do not care about broken childhoods or toxic family dynamics. They care about liability exposure and federal statutes. I needed to build a timeline that a jury could understand in 90 seconds. I opened a blank presentation file. I selected a stark white background with black text. I did not use transitions or graphic flourishes. The facts possessed enough gravity on their own. I started with the foundation. Slide 1 contained the certified public background check I pulled that morning. I highlighted the 0 arrests and 0 warrants in a bright yellow digital marker. Beside the clean record, I placed the high-resolution photograph of the crumpled fax draft from my father's wastebasket. I magnified the handwritten red edits and the misspelled word larceny. This established the initial act of forgery and malicious intent. Slide 2 mapped the digital intrusion. I exported the raw data logs from my server defense software. I translated the complex binary code into a simple, readable spreadsheet. Column A displayed the pinging requests attempting to breach my professional networking accounts. Column B listed the originating network location, pinpointing the Sedgwick County node. Column C displayed the forged letter of recommendation captured by the honeypot trap. This demonstrated a coordinated cyber attack originating from their specific residential address. Slide 3 required audio engineering. I imported the digital recording from the Sunday dinner into a sound editing program. I scrubbed the timeline, isolating the background noise of clinking silverware and ambient room hum. I cut the file down to a 30-second clip. I selected the exact moment Richard admitted his knowledge of my fabricated legal troubles and the subsequent exchange where Patricia offered to pay the deposit for the low-income apartment. I embedded the audio file into the center of the slide. I typed a verbatim transcript of their dialogue below the playback icon to ensure the corporate litigator could read their explicit admissions of a conspiracy while listening to their voices. Slide 4 was the executioner's blade. I opened the origination package for the defaulted $25,000 promissory note. I extracted the final signature page bearing my stolen Social Security number and my father's digital imprint. I placed it on the left side of the screen. On the right side, I positioned the employment verification field listing Evelyn's direct contact information. While reviewing the loan clauses, a chilling detail caught my eye. The fine print of the unsecured debt stated that if wage garnishment failed, the collections agency held the right to petition a judge for direct bank levies and vehicle repossession. My parents knew this. They knew getting me fired would only stop the payroll deduction. The collectors would have come for my checking accounts and my car next. My family was perfectly willing to let me lose my home, my savings, and my transportation to buy themselves a few extra months of financial breathing room. I added a final text box to the fourth slide, outlining the active default status and the impending wage garnishment order destined for the Overland Park Payroll Department. This finalized the motive, bridging the gap between petty familial sabotage and federal wire fraud. I reviewed the 4 slides. The architecture was seamless. It was cold, empirical, and devastating. There was no anger in my chest as I clicked save. The profound grief from earlier in the evening had burned away. I felt the sterile, precise focus of an auditor closing a corrupt ledger. I transferred the presentation to an encrypted flash drive. I printed physical copies of every document and placed them into a heavy black leather binder. I organized the pages with plastic index tabs, ensuring rapid access to any specific data point the legal counsel might request. I closed the binder. The sharp snap of the metal rings echoed in the quiet room. I walked into my bedroom and laid out my clothing for the following day. I selected a tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white blouse, and low block heels. I needed to project absolute authority. I needed to look like a woman who owned the room before she even stepped inside it. I laid down and slept for 6 uninterrupted hours. The anxiety that usually accompanies a confrontation was absent. You only feel anxious when the outcome is uncertain. I held all the variables. The equation was already solved. The morning sun broke over the Kansas horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of orange and gray. I dressed with methodical care. I secured the encrypted flash drive in my blazer pocket. I picked up the leather binder and walked out the door, locking the deadbolt behind me. The drive to the corporate center felt different than the desperate retreat of the previous morning. The highway traffic flowed smoothly. The logistics building towered ahead, its glass exterior reflecting the daylight. I bypassed the main employee entrance and utilized the secure executive parking garage in the basement. Evelyn had reactivated my access credentials specifically for this engagement. I rode the private elevator up to the top floor. The doors slid open, revealing the quiet, hushed environment of the executive suite. The corridor was lined with thick carpeting that absorbed the sound of my footsteps. I walked toward the primary corporate boardroom. The boardroom was a masterpiece of intimidating design. The walls were constructed of soundproof glass, offering total transparency to the hallway while keeping the interior conversations entirely secure. A massive polished oak table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by high-backed ergonomic chairs. At the far end of the room, a towering high-definition monitor was mounted to the wall, accompanied by a wide-angle video conferencing camera. Evelyn was already seated near the head of the table. Beside her sat David, my direct manager. To Evelyn's right sat a man in a dark navy suit reviewing a stack of manila folders. This was the chief corporate litigator. "Good morning, Isabel," Evelyn said, her voice projecting calm readiness. I placed my leather binder on the oak table. "Good morning, Evelyn. Is the technology secure?" "The network is locked down," David confirmed, gesturing to the screen. "The transmission will be recorded on a closed-circuit server." I walked past the camera lens, examining the field of view displayed on a small preview monitor. The wide angle captured Evelyn, David, and the litigator perfectly. It captured the polished table and the sweeping view of the Overland Park skyline through the exterior windows. I moved a heavy leather chair to the far corner of the room. I sat down and looked at the preview screen again. My chair was situated in the blind spot. I was physically present in the boardroom, but entirely invisible to the camera lens. The Wichita House would only see the 3 executives on their screen. They would have no idea the daughter they attempted to ruin was sitting 4 feet away holding the detonator. I opened my binder. I rested my hands on the cool leather cover. I watched the digital clock on the wall tick toward 2 o'clock. The execution phase was seconds away. I sat in the leather chair positioned carefully in the blind spot of the wide-angle camera lens. The digital clock on the far wall shifted to 1:45 in the afternoon. The execution phase was 15 minutes away. Inside the pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer, my cellular phone vibrated. A single short pulse indicated an incoming transmission. I retrieved the device and illuminated the screen. A new text message awaited me. The sender was Jessica. I opened the communication thread, the words rendered in a bright green bubble. Thinking of you today. Mom and Dad are handling the fallout. Love you. I stared at the 3 sentences. The text was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Jessica was preparing to log on to a corporate video conference to steal my livelihood. She was preparing to sit next to the parents who had stolen my financial identity. Yet she took the time to type a message feigning deep sisterly affection. She used the word love as a shield. It was a calculated performance designed to establish a paper trail of her own innocence. If her corporate coup somehow unraveled, she could point to this exact text message and claim she was merely a concerned sibling trying to help a troubled sister. She wanted me to reply with gratitude. She wanted me to cower in the dark while she ascended to my throne. I rested my thumbs over the digital keyboard. I did not draft a paragraph of rage. I did not accuse her of theft. I kept my response as cold and precise as the legal binder resting on the oak table a few feet away. I know exactly what they are handling. I hit send. I did not wait for a reply. I held the power button until the screen faded to black and the operating system shut down. I slipped the dormant device back into my pocket. The final emotional tether connecting me to my childhood was severed. I was no longer a sister or a daughter. I was the architect of an audit. I shifted my focus to the physical environment of the boardroom. The architecture of the space was deeply symbolic. The 4 walls enclosing us were constructed of reinforced, soundproof glass. It was an arena of total transparency. My childhood home in Wichita was built on the opposite principle. That house was a fortress of closed doors and drawn curtains. It was a place where lies were whispered in the dark and secrets were swept under heavy rugs. My parents thrived in shadows. They relied on isolation to maintain their narrative. Now they were about to step into a glass box illuminated by the unyielding daylight of corporate litigation. Lies cannot survive in a room devoid of shadows. The transparency of the corporate arena was going to strip away their camouflage, leaving nothing but the raw, undeniable facts. At the center of the expansive, polished oak table, the chief corporate litigator leaned forward. His name was Sterling. He wore a sharp navy suit and possessed the stern, weathered face of a man who spent decades dismantling corporate espionage. He opened the heavy black leather binder I had provided. The room was profoundly quiet. The only sound was the crisp rustle of thick paper as Sterling turned the pages. Evelyn sat to his right, her hands folded neatly on the polished wood. David sat to his left, his eyes fixed on the projection screen. Sterling studied the first page. He examined the clean background check and the high-resolution photograph of the crumpled fax draft bearing my father's red handwriting. He turned the page and reviewed the digital intrusion logs. His eyes scanned the binary translations, pinpointing the Sedgwick County network address. He turned to the third section and read the transcript of the Sunday dinner audio recording. A slight frown formed at the edge of his mouth. Then he reached the final tab. He viewed the origination documents for the $25,000 defaulted promissory note. He saw the stolen Social Security number. He saw Evelyn's name listed in the employment verification field. Sterling closed the binder. He rested his palms flat against the leather cover. He looked across the table toward the empty chair in the corner where I was seated in the camera blind spot. In my 25 years of practicing law, Sterling said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone, I have prosecuted hostile takeovers, embezzlement rings, and intellectual property theft. I have faced ruthless adversaries. But the sheer, calculated depravity required for a family to execute this specific sequence of events against their own blood is staggering. He looked at Evelyn. You were wise to intercept this hiring action. This is not a mere employment dispute. This is a severe liability threat. If they successfully infiltrated this firm, they would have weaponized our internal payroll systems. Evelyn nodded, her expression grim. We are neutralizing the threat today. Sterling turned his attention to the empty space in front of the camera lens. He began to outline the parameters of the engagement. He spoke with the measured cadence of a general preparing a battalion for an ambush. "We must adhere to strict procedural discipline," he instructed. Kansas law requires caution regarding recorded communications, but corporate hiring portals exist under a different legal umbrella. When external candidates and their proxies log into our proprietary conferencing system, they bypass standard consumer protections. However, Sterling continued raising a single finger to emphasize the point. We need this interaction to be airtight for the federal prosecutors. When the connection is established, Evelyn will initiate the dialogue. She must explicitly state that the line is being recorded for official human resources compliance. We need them to hear that warning and remain on the line. Their continued presence serves as legal consent. You look directly at Evelyn. You will ask them to state their full names and their current location for the record. This establishes proper legal jurisdiction. Once they are bound to the transcript, you will introduce the forged police report. "What if they deny sending it?" David asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "What if they claim a hacker spoofed their fax machine?" "They will not deny it," I spoke up from the corner of the room. My voice was steady, carrying across the quiet space. They believe the police report successfully terminated my employment. They think this interview is the reward for their intervention. They will proudly claim ownership of the document because they believe it proves their loyalty to the firm. Sterling nodded in agreement with my assessment. Let them speak freely. Do not interrupt them. Do not challenge their initial statements. Let them construct their narrative. Silence is our most effective interrogator. When a liar is met with silence, they feel compelled to fill the void with more details. The more they talk, the tighter the knot becomes. The litigator checked his silver wristwatch. When they have fully committed to the lie on the recorded federal transmission, I will step into the frame. I will introduce our senior risk analyst. Sterling looked back at me. That is your cue, Isabel. You will roll your chair into the center of the camera view. You will take the floor. I gave a single, slow nod. Understood. The digital clock on the wall shifted to 1:58. The silence returned to the glass boardroom, pressing against my eardrums. The air conditioning ventilation system hummed a low, steady drone. I focused on my breathing. I inhaled for 4 seconds, held the air in my lungs for 4 seconds, and exhaled for 4 seconds. I lowered my heart rate to a resting baseline. I was not a daughter confronting her abusers. I was an auditor presenting a finalized ledger. The clock ticked to 1:59. Evelyn straightened her posture. She adjusted the lapels of her blazer. David folded his hands. Sterling opened the leather binder, placing it just out of the camera frame for rapid reference. The seconds drained away. The anticipation was a physical weight in the room. The trap was armed. The bait was hanging in the open air. All that remained was for the target to step onto the pressure plate. The digital numbers shifted to 2 o'clock flat. A sharp, resonant electronic chime echoed from the ceiling-mounted speakers. The high-definition projection screen flared from black to bright white. The connection protocol initialized, indicating an incoming transmission. The text on the screen read, "Incoming call, Wichita residential node." The Taylors were knocking on the glass door. The high-definition projection screen flickered. The digital connection stabilized across the secure corporate network. The image of the Wichita living room materialized on the expansive wall of the boardroom. Richard sat in the center of a floral-patterned sofa. He wore a dark wool suit jacket over a crisp blue button-down shirt. His posture was rigid, projecting the manufactured authority of a patriarch. Patricia sat to his left, wearing a pearl necklace and a high-collared beige dress. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Jessica anchored the right side, perched on the edge of the cushions. She wore a tailored black blazer that looked entirely out of place for a woman who had not held a professional job in years. They looked like a royal family sitting for an official portrait. Their body language radiated smug triumph. They believed they were gazing into the inner sanctum of the logistics empire they were about to conquer. They expected to see a boardroom full of desperate executives eager to welcome their golden child. I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, tucked deep into the camera blind spot. My breathing was shallow and measured. I watched their faces on the glowing screen. They could only see Evelyn David and Sterling sitting at the polished oak table. They had no idea the daughter they attempted to erase was watching their every move. Evelyn leaned toward the center microphone. Her posture was impeccable. She wore the neutral expression of a seasoned human resources director conducting routine business. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Taylor," Evelyn said, her voice echoing clearly through the ceiling speakers. "Good afternoon, Jessica. Thank you for joining this remote executive assessment." Richard offered a magnanimous nod. He adjusted his suit jacket, favoring the camera lens. "The pleasure is ours, Evelyn. We appreciate the firm moving so swiftly given the unfortunate circumstances. We are here to help transition Jessica into the role and repair the relationship between our family and your esteemed corporation." He spoke with the arrogance of a conquering general, dictating terms to a surrendered city. He assumed my termination was already finalized. He assumed the empty desk was waiting for his preferred daughter. Evelyn did not react to his presumption. She maintained a steady clinical cadence. "Before we proceed with the formal interview portion of this dialogue, I must inform all participants of our corporate compliance protocols. This video and audio transmission is being recorded and archived on a closed-circuit federal server. Remaining on this line serves as your explicit legal consent to this recording. Do you understand and consent?" I watched Patricia smile on the monitor. She smoothed the fabric of her beige skirt. She thought the recording was a mere formality designed to validate their noble intervention. Con artists often crave an audience. They believe their lies are so flawless that placing them on the official record only cements their victory. "Yes, we consent," Patricia replied, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We want everything documented properly." "Excellent," Evelyn said. "To establish the proper legal jurisdiction for human resources files, I need each of you to state your full legal name and your current physical location." Richard spoke first. His voice boomed, carrying the weight of a man who believed he held all the leverage. "Richard William Taylor. I am currently located at my primary residence in Wichita, Kansas." Patricia followed immediately. "Patricia Ann Taylor, also located in Wichita, Kansas." Jessica shifted closer to the camera, leaning forward to ensure she dominated the frame. "Jessica Marie Taylor. I am sitting right here with my parents in Wichita." In the quiet corner of the boardroom, I let out a slow, silent exhale. The jurisdiction trap had closed. By stating their full names and their geographical location on a recorded corporate transmission crossing county lines, they had legally bound themselves to the interaction. They could never claim the footage was secretly obtained. They could never argue the video was a deepfake or a manipulation. They had just authenticated their own digital footprints on a monitored server. Evelyn turned her attention to the applicant. "Jessica, your submitted dossier was quite detailed. You mentioned in your cover letter that you are prepared to step into the senior risk analyst vacancy immediately. You stated you are uniquely positioned to handle the responsibilities your sister left behind." Jessica tilted her head, practicing a look of profound empathy. She deployed the exact facial expression she used when asking for a financial bailout. "Yes, Evelyn, it breaks my heart to see Isabel struggle with her legal demons. But I possess a very different moral foundation. I am reliable. I am ready to absorb her accounts and ensure the firm does not suffer from her poor choices. My parents raised me to value integrity above all else." The hypocrisy was so dense it almost suffocated the room. Jessica was lecturing a corporate boardroom about integrity while leaning on a forged recommendation letter. Sterling, the chief corporate litigator, sat beside Evelyn, his face carved from stone. He did not betray a single emotion, but I could see his eyes cataloging every lie. He was watching perjury unfold in real time. Evelyn folded her hands on the polished oak table. "Integrity is a core value here at the firm, Jessica. That brings us to the compliance portion of this assessment." Evelyn tapped a key on her laptop keyboard. The video feed on the projection screen split into two distinct sections. On the right side, the live feed of the Wichita living room remained active. On the left side, Evelyn shared a high-resolution digital scan of the Johnson County Police Report. The blurry seal, the fabricated narrative, and the misspelled word larceny were broadcast directly to the Taylor family. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, Evelyn continued, her tone shifting from a welcoming director to a clinical investigator. This document was intercepted by my department yesterday morning. It alleges that our former employee, Isabel Taylor, was detained on felony charges. Corporate risk policy dictates that we must verify the origin of all external legal documents submitted to the firm. The silence in the boardroom was heavy. I watched my parents' faces on the monitor. They did not look afraid. They did not recognize the danger. They looked vindicated. They believed this was the moment the corporation officially praised their intervention. They thought Evelyn was asking for a simple confirmation before handing the keys of the kingdom to Jessica. Evelyn leaned closer to the microphone. The reflection of the shared screen illuminated her face. For our official corporate records, Mr. Taylor, did you and your wife personally obtain and fax this specific document to our Overland Park office regarding Isabel? Richard did not hesitate. He did not consult a lawyer. He did not recognize the razor-thin wire drawn across his throat. He puffed out his chest, expanding his shoulders within his wool suit jacket. He looked directly into the camera lens with unwavering certainty. Yes, we faxed it to protect your company, Richard stated confidently. Isabel is a felon. It is a tragedy, but we believe in honesty. Richard's voice echoed through the ceiling speakers bouncing off the soundproof glass walls of the boardroom. Yes, we faxed it to protect your company. Isabel is a felon. It is a tragedy, but we believe in honesty. The words hung in the sterile air of the corporate arena. He had just delivered a recorded, uncoerced confession to federal wire fraud. He had proudly claimed ownership of a forged legal document transmitted across state networks. He had sealed his own fate while sitting comfortably on his floral sofa. Evelyn did not flinch. She maintained her steady clinical composure. She needed to ensure every single member of the conspiracy was securely bound to the narrative. She turned her attention back to the applicant. Jessica Evelyn asked, her tone smooth and inquiring, "Were you aware of your sister's criminal status prior to submitting your application for her vacated position? Did you assist your parents in bringing this matter to our attention?" Jessica leaned forward, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. She possessed the predatory instinct to kick a wounded animal while trying to curry favor with the zookeeper. She could not resist the opportunity to burn my reputation to ash in front of the hiring director. I knew she was struggling, Jessica lied, her voice trembling with artificial sorrow. Isabel has always had a troubled past. She exhibited highly erratic behavior growing up. She constantly stole from my parents. She drained their accounts to fund a secret gambling habit. When they discovered the police report regarding the grand larceny, I was devastated. But honestly, Evelyn, I was not surprised. I supported their decision to notify your firm. Someone stable and reliable needs to manage those critical risk portfolios. The scope of her perjury was staggering. She was sitting next to the parents who had literally stolen my Social Security number, and she was accusing me of theft. She was projecting their exact crimes onto my character. Sterling, the chief corporate litigator, leaned slightly forward in his chair. He had heard enough. He had secured the jurisdiction, the confession to the forgery, and the explicit confirmation of malicious intent from all three targets. The legal trap was fully locked. "Thank you for confirming your submission of these documents," Mr. Taylor Sterling said. His low, gravelly baritone cut through the smug atmosphere of the Wichita living room like a scythe. "And thank you, Jessica, for clarifying your involvement." Richard offered a polite nod, recognizing the authority in Sterling's voice, but entirely missing the context. "You are very welcome, Counselor. We simply wanted to ensure your shareholders were protected from her instability." Before we proceed with the final phase of Jessica's hiring, Sterling continued, shifting his posture to face the camera lens directly. "Our senior risk analyst has a few critical compliance questions for you." Patricia frowned. Her meticulously applied makeup shifted slightly, revealing the first crack of confusion. "Senior risk analyst?" she repeated. I thought you terminated her contract. We paused the promotion pending a documentation review. Evelyn clarified, her voice devoid of any warmth. The analyst is here with us today. Sterling turned his head toward the dark corner of the boardroom. Isabel, the floor is yours. I did not stand up. I did not rush the camera. I maintained the cold, sterile precision of an auditor delivering a final verdict. I placed my hands on the armrests of my heavy leather chair. I pushed off the carpeted floor. The wheels glided silently across the room. I slowly rolled my chair out of the blind spot. I entered the frame, moving directly behind Evelyn and Sterling. I positioned myself dead center in the camera view, perfectly illuminated by the overhead corporate lighting. I wore my tailored charcoal suit. My posture was absolute. I looked directly into the lens, locking eyes with the projection on the far wall. The reaction in the Wichita living room was instantaneous and catastrophic. The color drained entirely from Patricia's face. Her skin turned a sickly, pale gray. Her hands, which had been folded so neatly in her lap, flew up to cover her mouth. Richard's jaw physically dropped. His mouth hung open in an expression of raw, unadulterated shock. The smug, arrogant patriarch vanished, replaced by a terrified old man staring at a ghost. He blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination from his vision. Jessica recoiled. She threw her upper body backward, crashing against the cushions of the floral sofa. Her hands gripped the armrest like she was bracing for a physical impact. The triumphant applicant was instantly shattered. They had spent the entire morning believing I was weeping in a cheap apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes. They thought I was a broken, disgraced felon cowering in the dark. Instead, they were staring at a woman sitting at the head of a multi-million-dollar corporate boardroom, flanked by elite legal counsel, staring back at them with the cold eyes of an executioner. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. I let them suffocate in it. I let the reality of their massive miscalculation crush the air out of their lungs. I did not yell. I did not hurl insults. I spoke in the chillingly calm voice of a woman who has already won the war. "Dad," I asked, my tone carrying the specific, flat cadence of a deposition inquiry, "why does an Overland Park police report have your Wichita insurance fax header?" Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged, his vocal cords paralyzed by the sudden collapse of his entire reality. He looked at the shared screen where the police report was still displayed. He looked at the blurred text. He realized the fatal error he had made when transmitting the forgery. He had left his digital fingerprint on the weapon. Patricia shattered the silence. The shock morphed instantly into frantic, desperate rage. The facade of the loving mother disintegrated. She lunged toward their computer camera, her face contorting into a mask of pure panic. "She is lying," Patricia screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. "She is a criminal, Evelyn. She is manipulating you. Isabel is unstable. She hacked our system. She is trying to ruin her sister's chance at a real career because she is jealous. You have to arrest her." Her weaponized tears failed to materialize. The performance was entirely devoid of grief. It was just raw, cornered panic. She was flailing, trying to construct a new narrative while the old one burned around her. I did not argue with her. Arguing with a cornered narcissist is a waste of oxygen. You do not debate a liar. You bury them in data. I reached across the polished oak table. I placed my hand on the wireless presentation remote connected to the boardroom server. I did not break eye contact with the camera lens. "Mom," I said, cutting through her hysterical screaming with quiet, absolute authority. I brought the receipts. I pressed the transmit button on the remote. The right side of the split-screen projection displaying the forged police report vanished. It was instantly replaced by the title slide of my digital presentation. The broadcast beamed directly into their living room, overriding their local display. The snare tightened its final notch. I pressed the forward button on the wireless presentation remote. The receiver plugged into the boardroom server registered the command. The digital projection refreshed instantly, overriding the dual-screen display. The first slide of the audit illuminated the broadcast. It featured my certified state background check pulled directly from the Kansas Clearinghouse the morning they initiated their attack. I used a digital marker to highlight the column detailing criminal history. The zeros under the arrest and warrant sections glowed in bright yellow. "This is my actual criminal record," I stated, my voice measured and precise. "0 arrests, 0 warrants. The document you transmitted to my employer was a crude fabrication. You designed the forgery to trigger a mandatory administrative leave because you needed me escorted out of the building. You needed my income stream paused." Richard swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against the stiff collar of his dress shirt. Patricia darted her eyes toward the edges of her computer screen, searching for a technical escape route that did not exist. I clicked the remote a second time. The background check vanished, replaced by a dense grid of binary code and network tracking data. I pointed to the specific rows isolated in the center of the slide. "You did not stop at corporate sabotage." I continued, holding their terrified gaze through the camera lens. "You initiated a coordinated digital siege on my professional network. The software architecture I installed on my personal server captured your network attempting brute force password resets across all my industry accounts." I tapped the presentation pointer, highlighting a specific geographical coordinate. "This is your Sedgwick County residential node," I explained. "The tracking software mapped your exact location. It also captured the payload you downloaded from my honeypot trap." A new image materialized next to the tracking logs. It was the forged letter of recommendation praising the applicant. "You forged my digital signature to endorse Jessica for my vacated position," I said, watching my sister shrink into the floral sofa cushions. "You sent a fraudulent corporate document across state lines to this exact human resources department. You attempted a hostile takeover of my job title using my own stolen credentials." Patricia opened her mouth, her hands trembling visibly in her lap. "You cannot prove who was sitting at the keyboard," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "Anyone could have accessed our wireless network. It could have been a neighbor. It could have been a hacker." She was clinging to the final shred of plausible deniability. She thought a technical loophole could save her from the gallows. I did not argue with her desperate logic. I simply clicked the remote a third time. The third slide contained no documents. The screen was entirely black, save for a single audio playback icon and a scrolling text transcript beneath it. I reached over to the laptop console and tapped the play command. The pristine acoustics of the corporate boardroom amplified the sound file. The subtle clinking of silverware and the low hum of a suburban dining room echoed through the ceiling-mounted speakers. Then, Richard's recorded voice filled the glass room. Corporate environments are notoriously unforgiving. They demand loyalty, but they offer none in return. When a person encounters legal troubles, those companies cut ties instantly to protect their stock price. The recording transitioned seamlessly to Patricia's voice, offering the security deposit for the low-income apartment complex. Just in case the Overland Park situation becomes untenable, the audio was crystal clear. It captured their smug premeditation without any digital interference. The color drained entirely from Patricia's cheeks, leaving her meticulously applied makeup looking like paint on a porcelain doll. She stared at the screen, listening to her own voice seal her fate. The plausible deniability evaporated into the sterile air. They had confessed to the harassment campaign while eating Sunday pot roast. They had plotted my financial ruin between bites of carrots and beef. The silence following the audio playback was profound. The three of them sat paralyzed on their sofa. They had no remaining defense. Every avenue of escape was blocked by their own recorded actions. But the audit was not finished. The foundational crime remained hidden beneath the surface of the petty family drama. I clicked the remote one final time. The fourth slide materialized on the broadcast. The document displayed was not related to the events of the current week. It was a 5-year-old promissory note. The stark black text outlined a binding financial contract. Everything you did over the past 48 hours was a desperate delay tactic, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy cadence. You needed me unemployed because you knew a third-party collections agency was preparing to file a wage garnishment order with this firm. You needed the legal order returned to the sender, marked invalid due to job loss. I highlighted the signature line at the bottom of the loan document. 5 years ago, you utilized my Social Security number to secure $25,000, I stated, pointing to the digital imprint. You needed the capital to cover a massive federal tax levy against your failing insurance agency. You forged my name. You stole my identity. You sacrificed my financial future to buy yourselves a few more years of suburban comfort. I moved the digital highlighter to the right side of the screen, boxing the employment verification field. And worst of all, you listed Evelyn as the human resources contact. I concluded letting the gravity of the betrayal sink into their bones. You dragged this logistics corporation into your federal financial crimes. I looked directly into the camera lens, refusing to blink. You did not just try to steal my career, I said, my delivery cold and absolute. You committed federal wire fraud and identity theft. Richard's eyes widened in sheer, unfiltered terror. The realization of federal prison time finally broke through his thick, narcissistic armor. The arrogant patriarch dissolved into a panicked, cornered animal. He lunged forward off the sofa. His hands reached frantically toward his laptop camera. He was trying to slam the screen shut, trying to sever the connection and escape the judgment of the glass room. Before his fingers could touch the lid, Sterling spoke. The chief corporate litigator leaned into the frame, his voice echoing with the crushing weight of the justice system. Mr. Taylor, I strongly advise you to leave that device open. Richard froze, his hands hovering mere inches over the keyboard. Closing the connection will be cataloged as the destruction of evidence. Sterling continued, his gaze fixed on the terrified man. Submitting a forged legal document across state lines to defraud a financial institution is a federal offense. Attempting to infiltrate our corporate hiring structure using stolen credentials elevates the charge to a severe criminal conspiracy. Sterling folded his hands on the oak table, projecting total legal dominance. We have recorded your admission. We have secured the digital footprint connecting your residential network to the cyber intrusion. The entire evidence binder Isabel provided has already been transmitted to the Kansas Attorney General and the federal authorities. The sheer force of the corporate hammer shattered the Wichita living room. The united front of the Taylor family fractured instantly. Survival instinct replaced any remaining familial loyalty. The masks burned away, revealing the raw, self-preserving cowards beneath. Patricia turned on Richard, her voice shrill with raw panic. I told you the fax was a mistake, she screamed, pointing an accusing finger at his chest. You typed the badge numbers. It was your insurance agency machine. You sent the file. Richard spun around, his face purple with rage. He batted her hand away. You typed the narrative, Patricia. You took out the fraudulent loan. You made the calls to the bank. Do not try to pin this entirely on me. They screamed at each other, tearing their 30-year marriage apart on a live corporate feed. They threw each other to the wolves, desperately trying to save their own skin. Beside them, Jessica buried her face in her hands. The golden child was weeping uncontrollably, her tears staining her tailored black blazer. She curled her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth on the cushions. She realized her future was gone. She was a named accomplice in a federal fraud scheme. The corporate empire she thought she was inheriting had just transformed into a prison cell. The snare had snapped shut, crushing everything inside it. The high-definition screen flickered as the screaming match in the Wichita living room reached a fever pitch. Richard pointed a shaking finger at his wife while Patricia batted his hands away, her face twisted in raw panic. Beside them, Jessica curled into a tight ball, weeping into the fabric of her tailored blazer. They were no longer a unified front plotting a corporate takeover. They were three strangers trapped in a sinking submarine, fighting over a single life vest. Evelyn did not wait for their argument to conclude. She reached forward and pressed the red disconnect button on the conferencing console. The projection screen cut to black. The shouting vanished instantly. The silence that rushed into the glass boardroom was profound. It felt like the sudden calm after a hurricane passes. I exhaled a slow, steady breath. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for the past 48 hours dissolved into the sterile, conditioned air of the corporate suite. The audit was officially closed. The ledger was balanced. Sterling closed his manila folder. He straightened his tie and stood up from the polished oak table. He looked at me with a rare expression of genuine professional respect. "You built an airtight perimeter, Isabel," the chief litigator said, his gravelly voice filled with quiet approval. "I will transfer the digital files to the federal prosecutor this afternoon. They will not need much time to secure an indictment. The confession is pristine." "Thank you, Sterling," I replied. He nodded once to Evelyn and exited the boardroom, his leather dress shoes silent on the thick carpeting. David remained seated. He looked at the blank projection screen, then turned his gaze toward me. He picked up the original promotion contract sitting in front of his keyboard, the document I was supposed to sign 2 days ago, before the forged police report derailed my morning. He looked at the paper for a long moment. Then he ripped it in half and dropped the pieces into the recycling bin beneath the table. I felt a brief flash of confusion, but David quickly reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a fresh, pristine folder. When a crisis hits a corporation, David began, his tone steady and earnest. We discovered the true nature of our personnel. Most people panic. Most people let their emotions compromise their judgment. You faced a targeted, coordinated effort to destroy your livelihood and your personal freedom. Instead of crumbling, you treated the threat like a standard risk assessment. You protected yourself, and you protected this firm from a severe liability exposure. He slid the new folder across the table toward me. "I am reinstating your promotion, effective immediately," David continued. "However, the previous contract no longer reflects your value to this enterprise. We are adjusting your base salary upward by 30%. Furthermore, Human Resources is upgrading your access to a Tier 1 security clearance. You will now oversee internal fraud compliance for the entire regional division. We need your tactical precision safeguarding our operations." I opened the folder. The numbers printed on the page secured my future. It was not just a job offer. It was a fortress. I picked up the gold-plated pen resting next to the document. This time, no one pulled the paper away. I signed my name with smooth, even strokes. The passage of time is the ultimate equalizer. It separates the architects from the con artists. Fast forward 3 months, and the landscape of my life transformed into a quiet, steady rhythm. The chaos of my estranged family faded into the distant background, replaced by the mechanical grind of the justice system. The federal authorities did not hesitate. Armed with the recorded confession, the digital tracking logs, and the loan origination documents, the prosecutors moved with ruthless efficiency. Richard was indicted on multiple felony counts, including wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. The state regulatory board immediately revoked his insurance license, permanently banning him from the industry. The Internal Revenue Service moved forward with their levy, seizing the remaining assets of his failing agency. He traded his smug, patriarchal authority for a court-appointed defense attorney and a looming prison sentence. Patricia faced a different kind of execution. Her punishment was social. The narrative she spent weeks constructing at First Baptist Church unraveled the moment the federal charges became public record. The congregation learned the truth about the forged documents and the stolen money. The same church members who had formed prayer circles for her fabricated grief turned their backs on her. She became a pariah in her own hometown. When she walked down the aisles of the local grocery store, people averted their eyes. She lost her audience, and for a narcissist, silence is the ultimate prison. Jessica found herself entirely exiled from the professional world. The financial sector is a surprisingly small, interconnected community. Word of her involvement in a corporate infiltration scheme spread through human resources networks. Her resume was flagged. She became unhireable. The golden child was forced to face a reality where her parents could no longer subsidize her failures. I did not attend the court hearings. I did not monitor their social media profiles. I left them to navigate the wreckage they built with their own hands. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I stepped out onto the balcony of my Overland Park apartment. The Kansas sky stretched overhead, painting the horizon in vibrant shades of blue and gold. The air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn. I held a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, letting the warmth seep into my palms. I placed my cellular phone on the small patio table. The screen displayed my refreshed credit report. The fraudulent $25,000 loan was officially expunged from my record. The federal investigators cleared the derogatory marks, restoring my score to its pristine historical peak. The wage garnishment order never materialized. My savings were secure. My lease was protected. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. The quiet solitude of the morning felt profound. For years, I thought setting boundaries meant simply walking away and hoping the toxic elements of my past would forget my name. I learned that true independence requires vigilant defense. It requires the willingness to stand your ground when the ghosts come back to haunt you. I looked out over the tree line, watching the city wake up to a new day. My life was entirely my own. The seat I occupied was not granted to me by a manipulative family. I built it myself, line by line, ledger by ledger. When toxic people try to rewrite your reality, do not raise your voice. Do not match their hysteria. Panic is the currency of the guilty. Build a record. Document the inconsistencies. Let them talk until they exhaust their own lies, and let the facts clear the room. If you ever find yourself backed into a corner by those who demand your submission, remember that the truth does not need to shout. It only needs to be verified. Thank you for listening to this journey. If this story reminded you of the power of maintaining your composure under fire, hit the subscribe button. Drop a comment sharing your own strategies for dealing with manipulation, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. I will see you in the next one.